There's a podcast that's gotten incredibly popular recently. It's called the Telepathy Tapes, and in it, they talk to families who have autistic children, and those children, they say, have telepathic abilities. So let's take a closer look at it.
For decades, a very specific group of people have been claiming telepathy is happening in their homes and in their classrooms. And nobody has believed them. Nobody has listened to them. But on this podcast, we do.
The series starts with the bold claim that some autistic children can read their mother's minds, and then it progresses to even bigger paranormal claims. I'm really just interested in the reproducible evidence in the series. I'm not that interested in the stories that they tell about inexplicable things that happened in the past. The reason stories aren't very good evidence is because people could be lying, they could be exaggerating, they could be leaving out important details. I've even seen cases where people exaggerated their story with each retelling. If the show was just a bunch of anecdotes and stories, it wouldn't be that interesting. It would just be another woo-woo show. But they try to do some controlled tests, and that's where things get interesting. They claim that some of these kids are passing the tests with 100% or near 100% accuracy. So let's take a look.
You don't worry about color, okay? Go ahead.
Two.
Good.
Four.
Good.
One. Nine. Seven.
Now in this clip, an autistic boy named Houston is telling us what's on the Uno card behind his back, which his mother can see. In the longer version of the clip, he correctly identifies the card 8 times in a row. The odds of that happening randomly are 1 in 100 million. But if we want to be super skeptical about it, we might suggest that maybe he can read the card off of the reflection of his glasses, or in the camera in front of him. Or maybe his mother's giving him some sort of subtle cue that she doesn't even realize, and it's not obvious. It's still very impressive, but we could probably come up with something more airtight.
I'm going to generate another one. Okay. Ready? And 3. Yeah, and 3. Good job. Here we go. You're doing so good. 8 and 5. Good.
Again, it's impressive, and it's hard to see how this could be fake except through deliberate fraud by the film producers. But some people might be skeptical about the fact that his mother is holding the letterboard.
Let's please multiply 2 numbers and see if he gets it.
Okay, what is it?
9 0 0.
Unbelievable.
Now in that clip, there is no letterboard. Akil is typing in the numbers on his iPad independently. There's a number of clips of him doing something similar with different words as well.
All right, go ahead. Have you seen it?
Yeah, what do you want? Okay, Akhil, what's in my mind? What's the picture about?
C R O C O D I L E crocodile.
That's so awesome, Akil. That's so awesome.
I should also mention that the film producers said that they brought their own flashcards. These were not flashcards that Akil had seen before. The results are obviously impressive. The gold standard, though, would be to put them in separate rooms and repeat the tests. One of the researchers said that they have done those tests and that they still got very accurate results, although we have no footage of that. The podcast and the video clips seem persuasive, at least from the standpoint of this should be looked into further, not that everyone should change their entire worldview. There were some minor issues that I had with the podcasters trying to persuade people. During the series, they make the frequent claim that the scientific establishment ignores their results because of a commitment to philosophical materialism. That is, that the paranormal doesn't exist, and therefore they don't even need to look into it. I'm not sure if that's exactly what's going on. It seems to me that claims of the telepathy are just hard to believe, regardless of your philosophy. There's never been any good evidence for it, and scientists were looking into it in the 1960s and 70s. The problem is that the results were always very weak, or not reproducible, or fraud. On top of this, a majority of PhDs believe in God and the afterlife. Believing in these things seems at odds with philosophical materialism, so I'm not sure that philosophical materialism is the reason that scientists dismiss these claims of telepathy.
I hope that everybody understands how earnest and rigorous you are in your work. And I think it's an absolute atrocity that your medical license was revoked at one point, right?
Yeah.
Just for looking into this stuff.
Yeah.
Dr. Diane Powell, who's working with the podcast creators, makes the claim multiple times that she had her medical license revoked because she wrote a book on ESP. I looked into it a little bit, and the suspension happened over 13 months after the publication of her book, The ESP Enigma, which makes you wonder if they aren't actually connected. Jonathan Jarry, who looked into this claim, said the suspension didn't appear to be related to the book at all, but the reason was a pattern of practice including poor management of therapeutic boundaries, incomplete chart notes, a disorganized approach to treatment, a failure to respond to significant patient symptoms, and concerns over her management of patient medications. Her medical license also reinstated shortly afterwards. So, minus 2 points to Dr. Diane Powell for leading people to believe in a conspiracy that information about ESP is being suppressed. There's no plausible mechanism, and therefore it's false. I don't really take this seriously because it seems to prematurely dismiss any surprising phenomena. I understand that under certain circumstances, people might not want to waste their time trying to debunk something. For example, if someone believed in a flat Earth or created their own personal design for a perpetual motion machine, I can understand why someone might not want to spend a bunch of time debunking it. But it's useful to explain things, especially if they become popular. If you dismiss ideas too quickly, the believers will just see you as closed-minded, which will reinforce their beliefs. It's all based on facilitated communication, which is a discredited pseudoscience. The podcast does a poor job of explaining what facilitated communication is and the subsequent communication methods like RPM and AAC, so let's go over them. Facilitated communication was developed in the 1970s. The big problem with it is that adults are literally holding the disabled person's wrist or fingers as they press keys on a keyboard. Just a quick look at some of the videos will make you very skeptical that the child is actually in control. Because the teacher has so much control over the child's hand, they could easily type anything they wanted, either consciously or unconsciously. There have been a number of scandals involving M.Sc because people have doubts about who is actually doing the communicating. In some tests, they found that when a disabled person knew something but the facilitator did not, that they were not able to accurately answer questions. Rapid Prompting Method, or RPM, is a newer method developed in the 1990s. This is the method used in some of the telepathy tapes. In this method, a facilitator is holding a letterboard and the child is pointing at letters. Obviously, the facilitator has much less control over which letter the child picks. This method is far better than the facilitated communication. Augmentative and Alternative Communication, or AAC, is an even more hands-off approach. Some of the autistic kids in the telepathy tapes only seem to use RPM, but not all of them. Some of them use AAC devices. For example, Akil is independently typing on his iPad. Some skeptics lump all three of these methods together and say it's all discredited pseudoscience, but there's clearly big differences between them. I actually agree that we shouldn't use facilitated communication, but a child typing on his iPad is very different. Where does that leave things? It means people involved in paranormal research need to use a very strict set of criteria to avoid any accidental or deliberate cheating. It most likely means not using RPM in any of the tests, and putting mother and child into separate rooms while conducting these tests so that we can avoid any kind of unconscious communication between the two. It might involve getting some good magicians involved in the process because they're familiar with the ways that people can be fooled. Magicians have been involved in past paranormal research because they can sometimes figure out things that other people can't. For example, in the early 1980s, there was a man named James Hydrick who claimed to be able to move objects telekinetically with his mind, small things like pieces of paper. It looked impressive, but James Randi identified that he was actually blowing on these objects, but being very subtle about it. Sometimes magicians can spot things that other people can't. James Hydrick was a case of deliberate fraud, but sometimes there's accidental cheating going on. In the early 20th century, there was a horse named Clever Hans. The trainer would ask the horse questions like, "What is 3 plus 4?" and the horse would stomp its foot 7 times. People were amazed, but what was actually happening is that the trainer would ask a question, the horse would pick up on body language and begin stomping its foot. When it reached the right number, the trainer would change his body language again, and the horse would stop. The trainer didn't even realize that he was cueing the horse. What's going on in the telepathy tapes isn't as simple as Clever Hans. The mother and child would have to communicate some complex information in order for that to work. But it's worth keeping in mind that sometimes what we think is happening isn't actually happening the way we think it is. You should avoid getting woo-woo people involved like Deepak Chopra. People who want to believe are bad judges, and it reduces the credibility of the research. I don't think skeptics have convincingly debunked the telepathy tapes. This isn't facilitated communication, and phenomena shouldn't be ruled out a priori.